All right, good evening. Welcome to Friends in Faith. This week we're starting a new series, and we're calling it one of two things. Everything happens for a reason or not. Or everything happens for a reason, or does it? I mean, the title's really supposed to catch the issue that we're talking about in this series, though, which is the problem of suffering. And we're talking about all kinds of suffering, whether it's sickness, disease, natural suffering with tornadoes and earthquakes and hurricanes and those things, psychological, emotional suffering, spiritual suffering, the entire thing. And the question everybody asks, why does a good God allow this? You know, as I've heard it said sometimes, believers in God have to explain suffering and why suffering exists. Atheists have to explain why everything else exists. So we want to get into this. You know, this has been talked about almost from the very beginning. You go back to the Bible and you see the book of Job, which is all about suffering. You know, books that I've read, Rabbi Kushner, who wrote the one that you may have heard of, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, or an author named John Sanford, who calls it evil, the shadow side of reality. But it's something that comes up in every culture, in all times, in every land, everywhere. This question about suffering and why. Now, a lot of things have been proposed to explain it. The one that we named this after, everything happens for a reason. God never gives you more than you can handle, and on and on and on. And we'll be going over these during this series, you know, what they are and why they ultimately don't work, because each one is designed to be an apology for God. We really don't understand, but you're a good God, so we'll apologize for you since you're not explaining it yourself, which doesn't work. So that's what we'll be going through in this series. Why all these different things, sayings and excuses that we've made for God for suffering, why they don't work. And we will come to a definite conclusion at the end, one that I hope people are at least raises a little bit of a solution, if not answering every question. Okay, now when we get to this question of suffering and why it exists at all, really you have to start at the beginning, when it goes back to creation and Adam and Eve and the first sin. If you remember, in the Garden of Eden, God gave everything He created to Adam and Eve. You know, symbolic, it's all of this I've made for you. You take care of it. And you have one rule. And don't say the apple. Please don't say the apple. He didn't say don't eat the apple. He said, don't eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil. Well, at that time, they're in full union with God and their will with God's will. So when they eat that fruit, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what are they really saying? We already know good. Now we want to know evil. And there's our problem. Because evil can no way be attached to God. And so by saying we want to know evil, they immediately set up a barrier between them and God. But since all of creation was turned over to them to care for, that barrier exists between all of creation and God. And therefore, bad things happen. Now, you know, people ask the question, you know, why doesn't God do this or that? Well, part of this was the free will that He has given us, that at the beginning was in union with God, and now is no longer in perfect union with God, and at times is opposed to Him. So free will causes all kinds of problems for us. I mean, you can imagine people go through traffic signals and use their own free will and their free choice to go through red lights and run into other people. And their free will ends up hurting people, just as ours ends up hurting people. Children are hurt by the decisions of their parents. Parents are hurt by the decisions of their children. Strangers are hurt by the decisions of each other. But if you stick with the traffic signal example, it's even more. Imagine a traffic signal when everybody has a green light and nobody wants to give in. I have the right, I'm going first, they're not going to beat me. It just creates a disaster. And that, it's a good analogy for what we live in. People exercising what was God-given, our own free will, but using it only for themselves and not for the common good. And it causes all kinds of problems. And so there is the problem. I had somebody talking to me recently within the last month, and they were talking about a sickness that they went through, and it was awful, and they suffered a lot, and then eventually got well, but came with the question of, why did God do this to me? And I said, how do you know it was God? Why wasn't it the devil that got you sick and God who made you well? And the answer was, I just presumed it was God. And there's our problem. So that's what we're going to be going over these next few weeks, is dealing with this big question and all the different ways we try to explain it away, and again, apologize for God, and so forth. And again, like I said, we will come to a definite conclusion that should demonstrate you a God of love who is with us in all of this, helping us, loving us, and getting us through it. Good luck, and see you next week.